Good evening, everyone. My name is Kaylee Zazula, and I'm the program manager for Travis Audubon. And I welcome you to our first speaker series of the year. We are really in for a treat having Scott Harris as our speaker. Before we get started, I just wanted to make a couple of announcements. First of all, I wanted to thank everybody who donated to our annual appeal. We broke our $10,000 goal. So we are starting off the year on a very strong note. So we really appreciate everybody who chose to donate to us and make sure that our year is off to a good start. I also want to announce, if you did not see the email about our bird of the year, I know that over 400 people voted in our first ever bird of the year. And for 2025, it is the Eastern Screech Owl, a really great selection. And so this bird is going to be featured on our merchandise this year. We are going to have a shirt and a sticker that are designed by local artists. We're really excited to bring that merchandise to you this year. Just a couple of things before we turn it over to Scott. I ask everyone to turn off your microphone just to avoid distractions from the speakers. Remember that we do love questions and that you should put any questions for our speaker in the chat box, and we will include them in the question and answer session at the end of the presentation. And brand new, starting this year, we want to better understand who is coming to our virtual speaker series presentations. So I encourage you to complete a short survey following the QR code just on the screen right now. Also, in a minute, I will put the link to the survey in the chat box if you would prefer to access it that way. All right, well, I am going to pass it over to Jordan Weingarten, which is one of our board members, and he is going to be introducing our speaker tonight. So take it away, Jordan.
All right, well, thank you, Kaylee. So our speaker tonight is Scott Harris. He's actually a relatively new birder, got hooked in early 2020 after retiring to South Carolina with his wife, Randy, with whom he has now been married, I think, 45 years. Kind of like many of us, he never imagined being interested in birding until, of course, he became interested in birding and now can't imagine living birds and birding. He did have a previous life. He was a marketing and he had owned a marketing and branding company, had a syndicated newspaper column, had 2 weekly radio shows, was on boards of numerous organizations. He plays a harmonica in a blues band and has written an incredible number of books. His most recent book, and it's actually his first book about birds, and it's RaptorQuest, Chasing America's Raptors. This is available from Amazon, and he tells me that he can probably come up with a way for you to buy an autographed copy if you really want one autographed. Lots of people have had variations on the Big Year. His goal was tracking down every species of raptor in the lower 48 states. And tonight he will tell us about his adventures, his misadventures. I'm sure there were a lot of those, successes, failures, the things he learned, the people he met, and what he wants to do next. And with that, we'll turn it over to Scott.
All right, let's get this going here. Slideshow. Dun 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 dun. All right, 1 second. Play from start. Share. All right, can you see the cover of the book? Yeah, okay, great. Then that's where we're going to start. And Jordan and Kaylee, thank you very much for setting this up. I certainly appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to it. I love these conversations. It is always a treat to me to be able to share my year, which was actually 17 months, and my adventure and the people that I met. This book and the photos that are in it are a big part of that adventure, but the biggest part was actually the people that I met, even more than the birds and the travel and the surprises. I was blessed with a number of people, and that helped me out throughout the year. And maybe others could have. I could not have accomplished this without that. So I was thrilled to have it. My wife and I, as Jordan mentioned, we moved out here right at the beginning of COVID, March, April of 2020. We bought a house on a lake in South Carolina, which we had never visited before. We just saw it online. And the first time we flew out to see it after we bought it, we were standing in the backyard and this bald eagle flew across the lake and landed on a tree right on the water line. And I was able to snap this picture. I was not a birder at the time, but how can you not be impressed with a bald eagle? And so I thought that was a fantastic way to start our adventure here at the house. As I mentioned, I was not a birder, and a bit of a disappointment that I wasn't, as I've become one. My wife and I have been fortunate enough to travel to every state at least a couple of times and probably 35 or 40 countries. And I can only imagine the birds that I saw or the ones that I could have seen had I been looking. But I'm doing what I can to try to see as many as I can now. I have written, as Jordan said, I've written 50 some odd books starting in 2016. This is my first book in birding. My previous books were Westerns and children's books and books of quotations and business books and a variety of different things. I was looking for something that I could write about in birding. I am not an ornithologist and I'm not a scientist. I don't pretend to be an expert birder, but I am an enthusiast and I do have OCD. So I like things where I can create a list. And for those of you that saw this movie when it came out, The Big Year, I did see it when it came out, even though I had no interest in birding, but I liked all three of the actors. And then after I got a little bit interested in birds that summer of 2020, my son mentioned that we should watch the movie, and we did. And of course, it's about a big year, and I started to get this idea for the Raptors. And for tonight, I thought I would share with you the Jack Black character portrayed a gentleman named Greg Miller, for those of you that don't know. And Greg happens to be at the house tonight. He's on his way to a birding festival and stopped by to say hello. And so let me see if I can, well, actually I can't. Well, here, Greg, take my seat and just say hello real quick to the people. Hello, hello. They're not going to ask you questions direct. So.
Hi, I'm visiting Scott tonight in South Carolina on my way down to Florida for Space Coast Birding and Wildlife Festival. And I'll be seeing you guys, I think, in February, if I'm not mistaken.
Awesome. It's
Yeah.
nice to meet you, Scott.
Nice to meet Greg. I'm still here.
Greg, sorry.
And I got to tell you, Greg should be doing a presentation like this just on the movie, because the stories he shared have been fascinating. And I tend to think everybody would enjoy those. But that being said, the movie, when I watched it the second time, it motivated me to come up with an idea. I mean, all birds are fantastic. I certainly respect and enjoy all birds. But raptors to me are different. They stand out from the other birds. And I'm not saying that's better or worse. And I know a lot of people have hummingbirds or warblers or, waterfowl or whatever it might be as their favorite birds. For me, it is definitely the raptors. And so I started to think about it. And as I did some research, I discovered that there were 53 resident raptors in the lower 48 states. And by the way, my big year turned out to be 17 months, in large part because of my ignorance. I did not realize how difficult it would be to get the winter owls. And so I had to wait for a second winter to cycle around. Forgive me, I've got a frog tonight. I had to wait for a second winter to cycle around. Jordan asked me, or maybe it was Kaylee, but one of them asked me about the definition of raptors. And that is an interesting question. It is generally accepted that there are 53 raptors in the lower 48 states, and they're broken down like this: the 3 vultures, the 19 owls, and the 31 diurnals. For those who pay strict attention, I know that the northern pygmy owl, which you can see on the shoulder behind me, and that was from Yellowstone last week on a trip out there, is a diurnal raptor, but it goes obviously in the owl category. What I find fascinating when Jordan mentioned the definition of raptor and what it might be is there isn't one. There is not a generally accepted definition of raptor among the organizations and the universities and the experts. And it reminds me of 1964, Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart was asked to define pornography. And he said that he couldn't define it, but he knew it when he saw it. And I think for most of us, that's what it is with a raptor. They are difficult to define where you would keep all birds out. There are a number of birds that might be added based on the definition you use, and maybe you throw the vultures out based on the definition you use. As for the ones that should be considered U.S. birds, there is some discussion to be had there too. The Harlan's hawk, which is a subspecies of the red-tailed, is probably going to be split out in the next year or two. It has been split and lumped 3 times already over the years, and it's about due for another split. So if you are up in an area where they are, which is mostly in the Northwest, Montana and Wyoming and whatnot, make sure you mark that down, that it's a red-tailed, in parentheses, Harlan's. I saw a couple of them this week when I was back there, and I made sure to mark them down. So when they do split, if you are a list keeper, you pick up an extra tick. The hook-billed kite, I think, is more of an occasional visitor, crossing the Rio Grande and moving into southern Texas, mostly southeast southern Texas. And it has it does nest here occasionally, but it's really a Mexican bird, I think. And then you've got the northern hawk owl, the snowy owl, and the great gray owl. I think those are really Canadian birds. They come down here in the heart of winter to get into the warm weather of a Minnesota winter. And but we are Americans, so we claim them as we claim most things. So this is what I went with. These are the 53 that I started to chase when I started my trip. This is the distribution of raptors. Again, I'm using the lower 48 states, and all of the statistics that I give throughout the presentation come from eBird. And so if I say a bird has not been seen, what I mean is it has not been reported to eBird within the last 10 years. That's how I judge it. I use eBird, and I used the 10 previous years. I figured that was as good of an arbitrary pick as anything. 20 of the 53 raptors can be found in all 48 states and have been in the last 10 years, which is kind of cool. 2 have been found in 47 of the 48 states. They have not been found in Louisiana. I don't know if they don't like French food or they don't like parishes or what it might be. Maybe they're not jazz fans, but they've skipped Louisiana. And that is the northern goshawk, which is now the American, after a split this summer with the European goshawk, and the northern saw-whet owl. We have the snowy owl has only skipped 2 states, Arizona and New Mexico. So they have not been reported there. And 5 are typically found in 3 states or fewer. And those are the Apple falcon, the ferruginous pygmy owl, the whiskered screech, the hook-billed kite, and the white-tailed hawk. And most of those are most easily and readily found in your guys' home state of Texas. So Texas is a big area for raptors, and I spent multiple trips going down there to find the various birds and had a great time. Thank you very much. This is the distribution of me. People ask how the trip went and what I did. There were 7 different areas where I did cross-country trips over the 17 months where I was driving, and all of those were done by myself, and all but 1 were done without incident. I took 13 different round-trip flights, which totaled about 50 different legs, because a lot of the places I went were small little towns, and so you had a couple of stops along the way, and that went very well as well. Every one of those flights took off on time, and all but 1 landed on time, and the one that didn't left Houston late in the evening on its way to Harlingen, Texas, so I could chase the hook-billed kite. And when we got close to Harlingen, after about 45 minutes of flying, pilot came on the air and said, hey, there's a lot of fog down there. We don't know if we can fly, if we can land. And so we're going to fly around. We got about 15 minutes worth of fuel left. And if we don't break through the fog, we'll turn around and go back to Houston. I'm not a pilot or a mathematician, but if it's 45 minutes back to Houston, and we've got 15 minutes worth of fuel, that seems like a drawback. Somebody must have mentioned that to the pilot, because a couple minutes later he came on and said, what I meant is we have 15 minutes worth of fuel we can play with, and we have plenty of fuel to get back to Houston. And that's exactly what happened. The fog did not break, and we wound up having to go back to Houston, spend the night, and get out on the first flight in the morning. So that was unfortunate, but there you go. I was on the road for 25 weeks. I visited 34 states. I traveled over 100,000 miles on the trip. These were the states that I drove to most often: Montana, California, Texas, and Florida. These were the states that I flew to most often. And these were the states that I visited either by plane or by car. And like I said, it was a little over 100,000 miles. The only incident that I had driving was my fault. I was in Kalispell, and there was a report of a snowy owl at a small private airport just outside of Kalispell. So I went to see that, and I landed by plane on Monday. I looked Monday afternoon, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, all day. And by that time, I'd put in 15 hours and I had not seen the bird. Friday morning, I knew there was a place about 2 hours away that was just spectacular for raptors. So I thought, I'm just going to take a break from the airport. I drove the 2 hours before sunrise, got there, spent a couple of hours, saw 119 raptors in 2 hours in this farm area. It was just unbelievable. It was just spectacular. When I was done, I typed in Manning Road, which was the main road by the private airport. And sure enough, it came up 2 hours away, no problem. I clicked on it and I just started blindly following the directions and listening to my book. I looked up when I got in a bunch of traffic and I discovered I had been going north the whole time and not west. And I was at the Canadian border and I could not get out of the line and I did not have a passport. As it turns out, there was a Manning Road in Alberta, Canada, that was also 2 hours away from where I was in those fields. And when I got to the line, I said to the guy, look, I just want to do the 100 yards, do a U-turn, head back. I don't have a passport, didn't plan on being here, made a stupid mistake. They did not believe, I don't know if they thought I had drugs or guns or just a bad attitude, but they spent 3 hours going through my car. And when they were done, they gave me a little piece of paper and said, when you do your U-turn, hand this over to the US side. They actually shared a building at this particular crossing and they'll let you ride in. That did not occur. The US side kept me for an additional 2 hours, not trusting me or the Canadians to have done a good job stripping my car. So they stripped it again. By the time I finally got out and raced back to Kalispell, there were about 15 or 20 minutes worth of daylight left. And so I pulled up to this little airport, the Flathead Lake Sky Ranch Airport. And I saw a truck pulled over on the side of the road. And as all of you that are birders know, you see that there's one of two things: either they've broken down or they're on a bird. So I pulled up behind him, got out, knocked on his window, and I said, any chance you know where the snowy owl is around here? And he said, you mean that one? And he pointed about 50 feet away on a shed in a backyard. And there was this gorgeous snowy owl. And it just sat there until dark, probably 15 minutes. And I got these magnificent shots. And I don't mean they're great shots because I took them. I just mean they're great shots. The bird was right there. It didn't move. The light was magical. And I mean, I really got to watch the bird, and it was a special moment. And I just, those are the blessings to me on a trip like this, is having those moments and seeing those special birds. And this was one of them. This next one was one as well. This was down in your state, the ferruginous pygmy owl. On the King Ranch. I imagine most of you know the King Ranch, but in case any of you don't, it is a massive ranch in your home state of Texas. It is actually larger than the state of Rhode Island, which I always find fascinating, but it is. And I went on I took a tour because you can't go on as a private vehicle. So I went in a van with two other people, a mother and a son. The son was about 20, a student at UC Davis, studying to become an ornithologist. And we got on a ferruginous early by sound, but it wasn't a great sound. I certainly wasn't going to count it. Another hour passed and we saw one, enough to identify, but not a great look. I wasn't pleased with it. And then about an hour later, we were settling in for breakfast at a picnic bench out in the middle of the prairie on the ranch. And as I sat down on the bench and looked straight across from me about 20 feet, there was this ferruginous, this one right here, just sitting there. We spent about a half an hour eating breakfast, the four of us, the guide, the mother, son, and myself. And this bird did not leave. It preened a little bit, it closed its eyes and took a little nap, but it didn't leave. And then we packed up, and as we closed the van door and started to drive away, it flew away. So again, I mean, I'm sure it was a coincidence, that it stayed right until we left, but it was, for me, it was still magical. And while I was there, I mean, you see a lot of different birds on the King Ranch, but one of the ones that I saw was the white-tailed hawk. And again, I'm speaking to Texans, so maybe you guys know this. I did not, that their nickname is the Firehawk. And they're nicknamed that because when you guys get a fire out there on a prairie and the smoke comes up, obviously it chases as many insects up into the air as can possibly fly. The white-tailed hawks have learned that. So they follow the trailing edge of the smoke and just start picking off grasshoppers and everybody else. And the people that I talked to that have seen those fires said they just sat there and watched a dozen white-tailed hawks pick off insects. So I did not get to see that. Fortunately, there wasn't a fire, but it's a great story and a great nickname. So I thought I would share that with you. One more from the magical moments category. The young man that I met at King Ranch, his name is Frank Fabro. As I mentioned at the time, he was a 20-year-old kid going to school at UC Davis. And when I told him about the book I was writing, he said, "Hey, if you want, I can help you get on a spotted owl." Last summer, my project was finding spotted owl nests so that I could mark them off and keep the lumber companies from cutting lumber within a quarter-mile square of the nest. So he actually worked for the lumber companies, and they would give a quarter-mile parameter for every nest that he could find and mark off. So he was kind enough to drive about 3 hours to meet me one morning about 5 o'clock. We hiked about a mile up a trail, and he said, "I think if we make a right here, we can get on it spotted." And I said, "Great," but I didn't know how we were going to get through. I mean, the bush and the trees were so dense, and I didn't realize that he had strapped 2 machetes to his thigh, to his right thigh, and he turned around and handed me one and said, "Let's start hacking." So we hacked our way about a quarter or third of a mile through the forest, came to an opening that was maybe 60 feet in diameter, and this spotted owl was sitting there right in the middle. So once again, we figured it was breakfast time. It was about 7 or 8 in the morning. We sat down on 2 stumps, and the owl, just as it's doing in this picture, just stared at us. It would preen for a little bit. Once it dropped down, grabbed a mouse and came back up and ate it while we watched. And it sat there the entire time we did. We were probably there an hour, and eventually we packed up and left, and it did not fly away. It stayed there. I don't know for how long after we left, but it did. And to me, that was a gift. And going back to the question of why raptors, I think that's one of the reasons. I really, really enjoy the opportunity to sit and stare at these massive birds and watch them for a while and see the way that they handle themselves for an hour. And again, no better or worse than watching a hummingbird or a warbler or anything else. But for me, that's the magic. And this was another one that brought that. Swallowtailed kite is the first bird in the book. And my son and I were out on our pontoon boat on the lake, and we stopped the boat in the middle of the lake and lied down on the bench seats and lit up a cigar, and we were just talking and staring at the sky. And this and one other swallowtail flew by. I got this picture as it went by. First recorded swallowtail in the county and on the lake, which was really cool. And so we were excited about it and thrilled. My son was just excited and thrilled for me. He denies that he's a birder, but he's better at it than I am. And by the time we got the boat back to the dock, we had made the decision to do the book, and we'd come up with the name RaptorQuest, and the rest is a minor part of history, but an exciting part of my life. So that's why the swallowtail is the first bird in the book. Rocky Mountain National Park, the home of 4 different small owls. And in that park, there's a gentleman named Scott Rashid, who has spent almost 30 years now, it's 27 or 28 years, studying the 4 small owls that call Rocky Mountain National Park home. He focuses on the northern pygmy owl. This picture is of a boreal that I got on a banding night. I went back after we'd found the 4 owls on another trip and helped him for a week at a banding station, which he does every year in conjunction with the National Park Service itself. And those 4, by the way, are the northern pygmy, the boreal, as you see here, the northern saw-whet, and my only herd of the 53 birds. This is the only one I didn't get eyes on, which was a flammulated owl. 3 nights in a row, we heard it. 3 nights in a row, 3 moonless nights in a row, we chased it. And 3 nights in a row, we did not find it. But we heard it loud and clear every night. Just did not get my eyes on it. I just didn't then. And Scott is fanatical about owls. I went to California with him last week on another project I'm working on, and he just wanted to look for owls. That wasn't why we were there. It was a marine mammal trip. but he kept forcing us to go off into different areas looking for owls. So if any of you, excuse me, want to get on any of those 4 small owls and you're going to go to Rocky Mountain National Park, send me a note and I will gladly put you in touch with Scott. He has written multiple books on all of these different owls and is absolutely fanatical and passionate about them, and most certainly would be able to get you on at least a couple, 3 of them. This is a Cooper's hawk, and this is on Commissary Ridge in Wyoming, which has a banding and hawk watch station. They're about a quarter, half a mile apart, but they work together, and it is out in the absolute middle of nowhere. And I'm not a big fan of hawk watches, which is odd as much as I love raptors, but I like watching individual raptors in their environment, their habitat, not watching them fly by at 40 miles an hour and trying to count wing beats or, tail sizes or whatever. But I have nothing but respect for the people who do that. But in this case, I drove out from California to Wyoming in order to go there. And when I got close, the GPS failed me. I could not find this place. It was up on the top of a windswept hill with nothing. I mean, it was just nothing. And I just couldn't find it. And I kept driving back and forth and thinking, well, this isn't going well, because I was out of cell range. So I assumed that they were. And eventually I found a gate to a ranch. Let myself in, closed the gate behind me, drove about a half mile to the ranch. Beautiful place, probably 6,000 square foot, made out of timber. I knocked on the door, and almost immediately a woman opened the door. And this woman was right out of Central Casting. She was somewhere between 50 and 150 years old. She was not 5 feet tall. She didn't weigh 90 pounds. It looked to me like she was made out of leather, not skin. And when she smiled, she just lit up the whole prairie. She just had the greatest smile. And she just opened the door and she said, "You looking for the hawk watch?" And I said, "I am." She goes, "I can get you up there. The directions are easy from here. You want a sandwich and a glass of water before you go?" Which I did. And she made me a sandwich and gave me a glass of water and then sent me on my way with absolutely perfect directions. And I got there. I got to the banding station first, right as they captured this coop. And they were nice enough to let me release it, which was always a cool thing when I was at a banding station, like with the boreal that you saw a little bit ago, and a bald eagle in New Jersey, and just a variety of birds that I got to participate with. And I love doing that. So that was pretty cool. And that woman was just an absolute sweetheart. Red-tailed hawk, one of our more common raptors, no less beautiful because it's common. I just love them. 2 facts, one of which most of you will know, one of which maybe some of you will know. If you see a bald eagle in a movie or a commercial or a television show and they let out that war cry, that is not the bald eagle. That would be a red-tailed hawk calling. And not only is it a red-tailed hawk, it's almost always the same red-tailed hawk. That recording gets passed around by sound engineer to sound engineer to sound engineer because it's such a perfect recording and such a great call by that red tail. So that is just a neat thing, and I love that. The other thing that maybe you don't know is that one of the reasons that they are growing so quickly in population and have been for almost 70 years is due to President Dwight D. Eisenhower. When President Eisenhower came into office, he determined that he wanted to build an interstate highway system. And he got that program started and funded. And the program continued long after he died. It wasn't completed until '94. And one of the unintended consequences, and one of the great consequences for birders and especially red-tailed hawks, is that in building a highway, they created absolutely perfect red-tailed hawk habitat. What do? They build that highway and then they mow it on either side, 20, 50, even 100 feet. So it makes it easy for them to find the moles and the voles and the reptiles and whatnot. And then every 100 yards, they build what red-tailed hawks think are perfect perches. We might call them telephone poles or power lines, but the red tails love them. And so just about anywhere you go in this country, you can find red-tailed hawks. When I was driving down the central coast of California about 3 weeks ago, I think we had a record of 8 or 9 telephone poles in a row had a red-tailed hawk perched on it. There was just so much food out there. There was no competition. They were all just there, and it was just absolutely magnificent. Peregrine falcon is another bird that's made an amazing recovery. It suffered greatly from DDT in the 1980s. We nearly lost them. But when we banned DDT, their eggs got strong again, and they started to come back. And now they are urban. There is not a single major city in the United States, in the lower 48 states, that does not have peregrines nesting there. And there are two major reasons for that. One is peregrines are cliff nesters. And what do we have in major cities? We have skyscrapers, and skyscrapers to a peregrine apparently look just like a cliff. So they set up their nesting and off they go. And what's their favorite food? But pigeons. And what do major cities have? Tons and tons of pigeons. And now you have cities building peregrine boxes. The closest major city to me is about 3.5 hours away. It's Atlanta. They've got a Four Seasons there, and they recently built a peregrine box on their 50th floor, which is also their ballroom. And they're hoping that when nesting season starts around March, that they're going to get a pair. They have spotted birds there eating pigeons sitting on top of the box. So they're aware that the box is there. So fingers crossed, we're going to get some nesting there, and it should be spectacular. I'm really, really looking forward to that. Conowinga Dam. If you're not familiar with the Conowinga Dam, it is in Maryland. It's about 45 minutes northeast of Baltimore. It's on the Susquehanna River. And the Conowinga Dam, when the shad run up the river, they have to go through that dam, through the turbines and whatnot. And a large percentage of those shad get killed or knocked unconscious. And so as a result, during November and December, when that activity is happening, there are literally hundreds of bald eagles in a very small area, and they are all just diving down and picking off these shad. And in the water are the cormorants, who are trying to get their share of them without the bald eagles stealing them. But there are bald eagle after bald eagle after bald eagle. And if you want to photograph bald eagles, that is the place to go. They are there from sunrise to sunset. They're there for weeks on end. They're absolutely stunning. And it is a great place to go. Jordan, to your conversation earlier about knowing the right place and the right time and seeing something that's virtually guaranteed, this is as close as you're going to come. And it is spectacular. In the same vein is Sebastian Inlet in Florida, which is about 45 minutes north of Vero Beach. And that is where you can see osprey, not hundreds, but dozens. In September, the mullet run through a very narrow area that has a long walkway on either side of this inlet. And when the mullets run in and out with the tide, the osprey come in with by the dozens and are pulling these mullets up. I mean, they're often pulling two at a time as they come out of there. And again, you get some great pictures of these beautiful animals. And osprey are one of, if not my absolute favorite, in large part because they have some things about them that are unique. One, they're a pure sushi eater. I'm a big fan of sushi, so I support their effort there. Number two, they are the only bird in the world that carries their lunch with them when they go on migration. So they do what all other birds do. They try to double their weight and fatten up and shrink their organs and change their body metabolism and everything that a bird does before it's going to fly 650 miles over the Gulf of Mexico. But the last thing an osprey does is grab a fish. And it turns that fish head first, which osprey always do. And it takes off for Mexico or Central America, wherever it's headed. And along the way, it just eats the fish that it brought, which is spectacular. They are also the only bird in the world that when they fledge for the first time, which is normally around September, and they head south, they're the only bird in the world that doesn't return in 6 months. They stay 18 months. They skip the first return cycle for reasons that ornithologists have not agreed on yet. But they will stay in Mexico or Central America or even South America if they go that far. They will stay for 18 months, not 6 months. Then they return back, of course, to their home lake or their home shore or whatever it is. And then for the rest of their life, they follow their 6 month, 6 on their regular pattern. But for that first year, they skip coming home. And well, nobody knows why. It's a pretty cool thing, and that's what they do. They also are unique among raptors, is the last thing I'll throw out at you, but they're unique among raptors in that their eyes automatically adjust for refraction. So from 100, 150 feet up, stooping at 60 miles an hour, and when they see a bird in the water, when you and I see a bird in the water, we don't actually see where it is. We just see where we think it is. Refraction puts it somewhere else. But for an osprey, they know exactly where it is. So when they hit the water, they're on top of it, and they can dive up to 2.5 feet. Whereas a bald eagle, for example, is a surface hunter. They don't dive. They just grab fish off the surface. Great gray owl. Saw this in Yosemite, minus 25 degrees. and got to watch it for about 3 hours. Got to see it dive 3 times. If you don't know, great gray owls in the winter hunt in the snow. They actually can hear the little mammals and rodents up to, I think, 2.5 feet in the snow, and they dive headfirst into the snow, or talons first, and can pull those suckers right out of there. And I got to see this particular one do that 3 times over the, let's call it 2.5 hours, and 2 of them were successful. It came back with something to eat, and that was pretty amazing to me that it was able to do that. And I've seen those up at Sax-Zim Bog. If you haven't had a chance to go up there in the winter outside of Duluth.
And this is a good year for great gray.
And this is Greg tells us it's a good year for great gray. Maybe we should go up there.
We should.
That it's a good year for great gray up in Sax-Zim. So if you have not seen one of these birds, they are absolutely magnificent. They are fierce looking and brilliant. They're not brightly colored like most owls. A lot of browns and grays and some blacks. But those bright yellow eyes, and they stand out. And in this case, I was in a snowstorm, minus 25 degrees. And for those of you that photograph in weather that cold, you know that you've got to keep the windows down and the heater off, or your cameras will fog up. So it was a little bit chilly to do this, to be driving through Yellowstone. But I'll tell you what, sitting there with this bird for a couple of hours made every possible moment worth it, and was a great thing. I do chase rarities in raptors. If I find something else that's relatively close, I'll go after it. But generally, it's raptors. And you guys had that bat falcon down there a couple of years ago, and so I was able to get down there, and it was a pretty easy find. Came back to the same place every night for, I don't know, I think it was there 3 or 4 weeks, and then one night it was just gone. So I don't think anybody knows if it was predated or went back to Mexico, or if its visa ran out, or what happened. But for whatever reason, it was gone. But everybody that went down to see it, it was like being at a zoo. You'd see 50 photographers lined up. Everybody's waiting for the bird. It was really amazing. Another rarity that hopefully is on its way to the States right now is a stellar sea eagle. It's been here 2 winters in Maine. It goes to Aroostook County, right outside of the Aroostook Bridge. That's where it's been found. Once it gets there, it stays for weeks. I've managed to see it, and it is roughly 50% bigger than bald eagles. And so if you have been around, let's say, a carcass where crows are eating the carcass, and a bald eagle flies down and the crows scatter because the bald eagle is the apex predator. I've seen the same thing where I watched a stellar sea eagle take a Canada goose, and when it was done eating, it flew up in the tree, and then a dozen bald eagles flew down and started eating. And when the stellars decided it was hungry again, it dropped down, and those dozen bald eagles took off like they were crows, scared to death, and scattered all over until the stellars was done. It has been spotted recently in Newfoundland and Canada, which was its pattern the other 2 winters when it made it down to Maine. So fingers crossed that it's heading back down, and that we'll get to see it next month. So that is another one that we might get to see. And if you have a chance, my goodness, it's worth it. Even if raptors aren't your favorite, just to see a bird that massive. Look up stellar sea eagle if you get a chance. It is an extraordinary bird, massively big. It's one of the 3 biggest raptors in the world, and it is absolutely gorgeous. This is a northern hawk owl. This was the last of my 53 birds. This was in the 17th month, and I had just been up in Montana, where I got the gyrfalcon, or gear falcon, depending on what part of the country you're from. And I got home. I'd been home 2 days, and I got a call that said, hey, there's a northern hawk owl up here. And unlike this year, it was not a good year for northern hawk owls. So my wife was kind enough to put me on a plane the next day and sent me to Wise River, Montana. The odd thing was about that is the people in the town were willing to have somebody call me and tell me that the bird was in town, but they weren't willing to disclose where it was. They did not trust me to that point. So they wanted to get me into Montana, but not actually on the bird. So when I got there, I allowed myself 4 days. And I was lucky enough to find it the first afternoon. And this is a shot from that afternoon. I felt very, very fortunate. I went back the next morning. I was by myself. And again, it was cold. It was negative and a little bit of snow. And there was the northern hawk owl, again, on a power pole. This one has not been used in forever. It was about a 15-foot wide dirt road. I was the only one there. It was cold. It was early, right after sunrise. I got out of the car with my camera, and I just stopped and I watched the bird for a couple of hours. and the bird did not leave the pole for the first couple hours. And all of a sudden, it dropped down from the pole, flew across the 15-foot dirt road, and with its left wing brushed against my left leg, against my blue jeans. I don't have any idea why the bird did it. To me, it was a spiritual moment. It kept going about 30 or 40 feet and alighted on a small bush and stayed there for a while and then took off. And I didn't see it again that morning. I did see it later that afternoon. I found it again. That is the bird that is on the cover of my book. It might have been recency bias because it was the last bird I shot and the last bird I saw. But I also think of all the pictures I took, this was my favorite. And so we put it on the cover of the book. If you want to take a look at the book, my website is naturallyscott.com. I also have all my pictures there. I encourage you to look at the pictures. My email, I've got to add it to the slide, my apologies, but it's just scott@naturallyscott.com. If you have any questions about anything at all, you're certainly welcome to send me a note because I'm happy to answer any questions. I felt so honored and privileged by what I was able to do and all the people that helped me that I'd be thrilled to help anybody else. So all the pictures you see in the book and all the pictures you see on the website are my shots. This is the only picture you'll find of those hundreds of pictures that is doctored. The ferruginous hawk is pure. The power pole that it's standing on, the crossbeam is pure. The sky is pure. And I took this at Pinnacles National Park in north central California. Even the yellow sign is accurate. The only thing that isn't is in real life, that yellow sign says high voltage. I changed it to thank you because it's the last slide. And I want to say thank you to everybody for having me in tonight and giving me the opportunity and the privilege to speak to you. And I always want to say thank you to my wife because without her, none of this could have happened. And of course, to Greg Miller for joining us and being here tonight, which is a pleasure for me and hopefully for you guys. And now, Jordan, I'm thrilled to answer any questions you guys might have.
All right. Well, thank you. Let me get to questions that have been put in the chat here. And let's see. How many birds did you find with the help of guides versus the number that you found on your own?
Well, I would say guides got me on roughly half of the birds, but in almost every case, I was able then to get on the bird on my own later. So what I do a lot of times, if I'm going to a new place, a new part of a state or a new state, I like to hire a guide for the first day so that I can learn a lot of the local knowledge and what's going on. And then after that, I like to do it on my own, and especially on repeat trips, if I can get back out to that certain location. So no one's ever asked that before, so I don't have a definitive answer. But I would guess that a third to a half of the birds I was put on by a guide. And then almost all of those I was able to find again on my own.
Okay. And let's see, our second question, did you find any raptors when you weren't actually looking for them? So you're having dinner or pumping gas or whatever, and oh my God, look there.
Yes. The gyrfalcon I stumbled on. It was we had pulled over to the side of the road for something or another. I can't remember what it was, and we were just chatting, and I looked off in the distance, and there it was, just out in the middle of nowhere, and it was pretty unexpected, at least for me. So I was thrilled about that. I mean, obviously, because I traveled so much, I was surprised by raptors frequently, but the ones that were challenging to find, I was always looking for. I mean, if I was in southern Texas, I was looking for a hook-billed kite. If I was in Minnesota, I was looking for a great gray. And so I guess in fairness to the answer, I was always surprised when I saw them, but I was fortunate enough to be in the position to hope for and reasonably expect to see them at some point.
Okay. What camera lens setup do you use?
Okay, I've been giving this presentation now for almost 2 years, and if you guys hadn't asked, you would have been the first organization that didn't. Everybody asked that at some point. I carry 2 cameras with me. I carry a Sony A1 with a 200-600 telephoto lens, and I carry a Sony A9 II with a 70-200. And that affords me the opportunity to obviously shoot far away to get up to the 600. But some of the birds or some of the mammals, some of the bigger animals, if I'm closer, I like to use the 7200. Like when I was in California a couple of weeks ago, I mean, we went from the smallest little shorebirds on up to humpback whales. So there were a lot of different things that we saw in a lot of different lenses. My wife says I carry a pistol and a rifle when I'm out there because I've got the one relatively short lens and then the one relatively long lens.
All right. Next question.
Jordan, I'm sorry. Let me interrupt you for 1 second.
Sure.
My apologies. By the way, I shoot Sony and I love it. I think it's a magnificent system. But honestly, I mean, if you're shooting the OM system, if you're shooting Canon, if you're shooting Nikon, they're all making great systems. I think a lot of it is Ford, Chevy, and Coke, Pepsi. So I love Sony, and that's what I'm going to keep shooting. But I'm not telling you that if you don't shoot Sony, you're not shooting a good system.
No, it's the poor photographer who blames his tools. You can do great stuff with lots of different cameras.
Yes, you
Like
can.
this. Okay, so there obviously are non-raptor predatory birds out there. This question is, how many predatory bird species are there in America? So basically, how many predatory birds are there that aren't raptors? I mean, I guess we were talking about loggerhead shrikes and a variety of other things.
Well, loggerhead shrike is the one that's most commonly pointed out, but Greg sitting behind me is itching to tell you that almost every bird is a predatory bird
Right.
because they eat
Yep.
insects.
Exactly.
So it depends on your definition. If it's the size of the prey, then you got to take a look at a kestrel or an elf owl and say, do those really count? Or a swallowtail because they're just eating grasshoppers. And so that's one of those things when I said there's not a definitive definition for raptor, that's the reason why.
Yep.
People say, well, they're birds of prey, they're predators. So it's all birds that are predators. All birds that are predators are almost all birds. I don't know how many birds don't eat even insects, but certainly a huge percentage of birds are predators. And loggerhead shrike, by the way, you brought that up, Jordan. That is the one that is most commonly brought up as the why aren't they considered a raptor? If you're going to, why is a turkey vulture considered a raptor and why is a shrike not? And I don't think there's a good answer for that question.
Yeah, when I first started birding, I looked up raptor definition and quickly got confused there. Vultures just eat dead stuff.
Yep.
Doesn't seem fair to put that in the same category as a bird that's diving into the snow to get a live mouse.
No, and the truth is, if I was to redo the book, I would go from 53 to 50, and I would take out the turkey and black vultures and the California condor.
Yeah.
It would upset a number of people, but I tend to think that's the direction we're going. And I think what we're going to do is add the Harlan's hawk and get back up to 51. There is one endemic raptor in Hawaii, brilliantly named the Hawaiian hawk, that only lives on the Big Island. And then Hawaii has two other raptors. They have a barn owl and they've got a short-eared owl, but their short-eared owl is going to be split from our short-eared owl pretty soon. It's a pure diurnal owl. It has different sounds, different mating habits. The research was turned in last year, and I fully expect that to be split in 26 or 27. And it's very easy to find. It is the easiest owl, at least that I've experienced, to find.
All right. How did you plan your raptor year? eBird, other resources?
Yes, eBird was a big part of it. So again, my inexperience, I mean, if I was to do it again, I could do it in a year. But my inexperience took me to 17 months. Part of what happened is I was such a new birder. I did not have connections or a network of friends in that birding world when I started. Halfway through, I had met a lot of people, and a lot of people were helping me and calling me and giving me updates and sharing things with me. If I was to do it now, it would be relatively easy to at least go to the right place at the right time. Whether I found them or not is another subject. But at least I would be able to do that. And I would plan my winter birds better. And eBird is a huge help. I mean, it is an absolutely magical tool. Greg and I have talked a little bit about, eBird not existing in his world when he was younger, and having to call into hotlines and have code names and all those different things. It's a miracle to me that they discovered 200 birds a year, much less 700. But now with eBird, you know, you can really find birds. I mean, you can narrow it down by exact locations and by within 1 month of a time frame. It's a pretty cool deal, and so you can just you can map it out. And a lot of the guys publishing Big Year books now, they're publishing their routes and what they see and when they expect to see them, and so you can use those tools as well. But mostly it's just making friends and networking and making phone calls. Call, you know, if you're looking for owls, call the clubs in Minnesota. There'll always be somebody that says, "My God, get up here and I'll take you out and show you around." Just like Jordan, just like you and Kaylee did with the warbler. Hey, if you come down, we'll arrange for a little tour for you. We'll get you on that golden cheek. And that exists all over, because one of the great things about birding is, unless you're a complete and total jerk, you're almost more excited getting somebody else on a bird than you are getting on the bird yourself. I think it's a thrill to get somebody on a bird that they're looking for.
All right.
Long answer to a short question.
Yeah, that's great. I think the next one you may have answered already. Do you think shrikes should be considered part of the raptor family? I guess, well, raptors aren't really a family, but should they be classified as raptors?
I think they're right on the fringe. I think they're closer to they should be being added than vultures are to being in. To me, I think there's a much clearer argument for getting rid of the 3 vultures. But there is a reasonably strong argument for adding shrikes. And, you know, when you read these definitions, they talk about curved beaks. Well, do we allow all the parrots in? You know, there's just that's, I think, why they don't have a clear definition of what raptors are. I would lean toward yes on the shrike.
Yep.
I would dump the vultures and add the shrike, but nobody's called and asked me. I keep waiting. Cornell's got my number, but so far they're not calling.
That just seems rude.
Thank you.
Do you think you would ever become a rehabber for injured raptors?
I have been on the board for the Carolina Raptor Center, and I was on the Raptor rescue team for 3 years. So I did that right after I started birding. So the answer is yes. I spent 3 years picking up injured birds throughout South Carolina and bringing them to North Carolina, to Charlotte, to the center. And that was a privilege. The sad part is about 3/4 of them die, because the ones that are easily found and caught are the ones that are hit by cars on the side of the road, and most of those birds don't survive. But every once in a while one does. And the great thing is, we have a rehab center about a half hour from our house. This woman rehabs everything. If you walk in with a sparrow or a mouse or, you know, an alligator lizard, she'll rehab it, but she specializes in raptors. And I've become her go-to for releasing the birds. So when she's ready to release birds, because she knows I'll drive anywhere, she'll call me and say, "Okay, this is where it was caught 3 hours away. You got to drive over there to let it go." I'm thrilled to do it. So I have a whole bunch of pictures letting, you know, barn owls and barred owls and bald eagles go. And it's, I love doing that. So the answer is yes, which would have been a shorter answer. And by the way, if anyone has any questions for Greg, I'm sure we can talk him into answering them. But that's a rabbit hole, getting him talking about that movie.
That's all the questions we've got in the chat right now. Anybody else want to put something in? We're still have time here. Don't feel obligated, but this is your opportunity.
Kaylee, you look like you're on pins and needles waiting for a question.
I am. Oh, we do have one more. So do
All
you
right.
have,
Okay.
oh, we've got a couple of them.
There we
Okay.
go.
All right. I'm just gonna go back out for a second, because we have a couple more questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So one that was just asked is, what is your favorite raptor? I think you mentioned the osprey, but maybe I misheard you.
Well, the osprey and the red tail are probably my favorite in the diurnals. But I struggle to not say great gray or northern hawk owl. I just think those are absolutely stunning. And Greg just handed me a note, by the way, if any of you were looking for it. It is an eruption year for great gray owls. So if you're looking to see a great gray, this is the time. Is this at Sac Sim?
Yes,
This is at Sac Sim. And I mean, I went in a non-eruption year and still got to see 2 or 3.
So zaxim.org.
Zaxim.org, SAXZIM.org. And he just showed me the thing, and it is an eruption year. So
map where to find everything too.
there you go. So those are probably my favorite, the great gray and the northern hawk owl. I just think there's, excuse my French, I just think they're such badass birds. I mean, you know, they live in negative temperatures, and they're hunting in the snow, and you know, they're always on the edge of survival, and it's just fantastic. I absolutely love them.
All right. What's your next project? Bird related.
I've got 2 books that I'm working on now, and Greg is in one of them. One of them is called Why We Love Birding, 52 Great American Birding Tales. And so I am interviewing 52 birders from around the country and asking them about their favorite day of birding or their favorite moment within a day, and then a little bit about their background, professional in birding and whatnot. And I'm putting that together as a book, and I've got some amazing people that have participated already as guests and are lined up as guests in the future. None more exciting than Greg, by the way. So that is one. The other one I'm doing, Jordan, and you struck a chord when you were talking about the golden cheek, is a book called American Safaris, Zoos Without Fences. And that is a book about the places within the country, within the 48 states, that if you go to the exact location I suggest, and you go at the exact time that I tell you to go, you are virtually guaranteed to find the animal that I tell you is there. And that book is being written about mammals, both terrestrial and marine, and raptors. So, for example, Conowinga Dam and Sebastian Inlet, which I highlighted here, those will be 2 of the chapters in the book. Elephant seals in San Simeon, California, and elk in Rocky Mountain National Park. In Yellowstone, I was up studying the bison and the coyotes for a week. Those will be 2 chapters. And so those are my 2 projects. It's interesting because one of them requires a lot of travel. I've got to take a trip every month for 2 years to cover all the locations in the country. And then the other one just requires me to sit on my fat butt and do Zoom calls with birders and then write the chapters. So they couldn't be much dramatically different.
Okay. What's the festival in Florida next week?
Space Coast Birding and Wildlife Festival.
I'm switching seats with Greg.
Okay. Where did you see the spotted owl?
Oh, no, you stay there. Spotted owl was in El Dorado National Forest in Northern California.
All right. And there's about 1,000 people who wrote this was a great or amazing or wonderful or some variation of that presentation.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. That is quite flattering, and I am honored and privileged to have been here and thoroughly enjoy it. And I'm glad so many of you enjoyed it. That's why I do it.
All right. Well, we look forward to have you back to talk about your next book.
Thanks very much, Jordan. And thank you to Kaylee and to everybody else that took the time. And thanks to Greg for sitting in and being a part of it. So a fantastic night. And I meant it, by the way. It's Scott at naturallyscott.com. If any of you have follow-up questions, I know sometimes people are shy about asking them during the presentation, or they don't think about it until the next day. But if you're looking for specifics on a bird, or you just have questions, send me a note. I'm thrilled to answer it.
Thank you very much, Scott. And thank you, Jordan, for helping facilitate. And thank you, Greg, for also being a nice cameo. That was fun. I hope to see you all at our meeting in February on the 20th. That is going to be with Dr. Robert McCracken Peck. He is going to be talking about, and forgive me if I mispronounce this name, Louis Agassiz Fuertes, who is the lesser known bird artist to John James Audubon, but also deserves a presentation where we learn about him because he was very talented and has excellent work. So I hope to see you all there and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.